All right, let's dive into one of the most talked about and honestly most misunderstood document releases in a long, long time, the Epstein Files. We're talking millions of pages of evidence just out there in public now. So we're going to break down what that actually means.
So first things first, what even are the Epstein Files? You hear the name everywhere, right? But the actual content, what's really inside, often gets totally buried under rumors and, frankly, a lot of wild speculation. Our job here is to cut through that noise.
And to start, you just have to get your head around the sheer scale of this thing. This is not some small leak, it's a tidal wave of information. We are looking at over 3.5 million pages of documents. I mean, just try to picture that. It's an absolute mountain of evidence, and it details a criminal network that is just sprawling and incredibly complex.
Okay, but before we can even begin to understand the documents, we've got to talk about the man at the center of this whole web. Because you really can't separate the story of these files from the story of Jeffrey Epstein himself.
So who was this guy? Well, in a nutshell, Jeffrey Epstein was a financier who got famous, or infamous, for two main things: his unbelievable connections to the world's most powerful and elite people, and of course his conviction as a sex offender who is deep into the trafficking of minors.
If you look at the timeline, he spent the early 2000s building that powerful network. That all led up to his first conviction as a sex offender back in 2008. But the moment this story really exploded onto the global stage was his arrest in 2019 on those federal charges. And his death in jail? Well, that didn't end the story. Nope. In a lot of ways, it was just the beginning of the public's demand for answers.
And that brings us right to the heart of what we're talking about today. What is actually in this massive pile of documents? And the big one, why on earth can we all see it now? So these 3.5 million pages aren't just one thing. Yeah, the huge majority, about 70%, are formal documents. Court filings, witness statements, that sort of thing. But the rest? That's where you find thousands of private emails, those infamous flight logs from his private jets, and even photos and videos that were gathered up during the investigations.
So how did this all become public? It wasn't just some random leak. This was a deliberate act. See, back in 2026, the U.S. Congress passed something called the Epstein Files Transparency Act, and that law specifically mandated that all of these documents had to be released to the public.
So what was the point of this act? Well, it had a few key goals. The biggest one was just straight-up transparency, to shine a light on a case that had been hidden in the shadows for way too long. It was also meant to drive accountability for anyone involved, and of course, to seek some measure of justice for the victims. Plus, it aimed to stop misinformation by just putting the actual evidence out there for everyone to see.
So when you dig into this trove, these are the big categories you're going to find. You've got communications, like emails and messages. You've got travel records, who was on his planes and when. You've got mountains of court documents, financial records that show where the money came from and where it went. And yes, visual evidence, like photos and videos.
Okay, I need everyone to really hear this next part because it is absolutely the most critical thing to understand. Just because someone's name shows up in these files, whether it's on a flight log, in an email, whatever, it does not automatically mean they're guilty of anything. We have to remember, this is raw evidence and information, not a final verdict from a court. It's a starting point for questions, not an answer book.
Now, when you release millions of pages like this into the wild, the fallout is never, ever going to be contained to one place. The release of these files has created a massive ripple effect, and you can feel it pretty much all over the world.
We're seeing that impact in three main ways. First, there's intense political scrutiny, as governments are forced to re-examine the connections of some very influential people. Second, public awareness has just skyrocketed, which gives a much bigger platform to the victims' stories. And maybe most importantly, law enforcement is now actively chasing down brand new leads they're finding buried in all this data.
And I really want to stress this. This is not just an American story, not by a long shot. The files have proved, beyond any doubt, that Epstein's network was truly global. It stretched across oceans, and as a result, it has triggered brand new investigations in countries all across Europe and beyond.
So at the end of the day, why does any of this matter to you? Because this whole event sets a huge precedent. It's a landmark moment for public transparency. It's forcing a really tough, really necessary conversation about accountability, especially for the rich and powerful. And it's a sobering lesson, showing us exactly how these dark, sophisticated criminal networks actually work.
Look, releasing the Epstein files is a monumental step toward openness. There's no question about that. But as we all begin to sift through these millions of pages, it leaves us with a really big, really complex question to think about. Does all this transparency actually lead to real justice? I guess that's something we're all going to find out together in the years to come.